The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
So, you know what last night kind of was? Kind of the last day of school. Yeah. Second night of the NBA draft. I know they got the hockey draft tonight. But other than baseball and endless talk on ESPN about who fits into the top tier of quarterback and who is elite, we ain't got bupkis until the NFL gets going. And evidence of that, last night, Scott Van Pelt put out kind of a farewell to summer tweet. SVP is not going to be back on the air until August 26th, and he deserves that. Boy, he is terrific with ESPN. But the sports calendar makes him sort of expendable until then. He does, of course, the Monday Night Countdown show. He does the wonderful show on at midnight on ESPN, the Scott Van Pelt Sports Center, and golf and other things for the network. But, yeah, it's like, hey, I'd like to take the summer off with my kids. I believe he's got a beach house in Rehoboth, and why not? And until they figure out a way to get these other sports pumped up a little bit, especially baseball, that's the way it's going to be. The NFL controls the calendar, and although we got training camps starting in about a month, less than a month. I think the Commanders' rookies start July 18th, and the veterans are due the 22nd. It's still training camp, you know. It's just not quite the same thing, and the exhibition season continues to be a joke. We're headed for 18 games, so they'll cut that down to 2, which means only the first one will mean anything. Nobody will play in the second, and eventually we'll get to 20 games. That's where we're headed. But yeah, it's really interesting to look ahead at the next 2 months and go, yeah, good time to go on vacation because just not a lot happening. But there are things that we can focus on here, and one of them is what they got in the draft the last couple of nights. And I was watching actually last night, and you know, here's also the thing about the NBA draft. It used to be that you were fairly familiar with the names because the foreign influence was next to nothing. You know, occasionally you'd get a foreign player taken, but it was mostly college basketball players who had stayed for 4 years. You were familiar with them. And now, watching the second round of the draft really isn't that much different than watching the first round of the draft because I don't know many of the names from the first round. Oh, sure, I knew Cooper Flagg. Everybody knew Cooper Flagg was going to be taken, and the Ace Bailey story. Ace Bailey didn't want to work out with anybody, and maybe he was going to drop to the Wizards. There were stories like that. But, you know, second round, it's mostly names that I was not familiar with. And as a matter of fact, when it came time for the Wizards pick at number 40, I go, oh, okay, I know him. He played at Georgetown. Micah Peavy was the player they took there, but he didn't stay long. They traded down with New Orleans, and they picked up Jameer Watkins, who's a 6'5", what they call wing now. You know, as growing up, I never heard of a wing. A wing was hockey. You had a guard, you had a forward, and you had a center. And even the word point in front of guard, that's, I think, less than 30 years old. Sometimes you would hear lead guard, but like when Earl Monroe was traded from the Bullets to the Knicks and teamed up with Walt Frazier, I don't think he was necessarily identified as a point guard. It was just, yeah, that's the backcourt, Monroe and Frazier. That's it. And somewhere along the way, point became very important. Oh, can he play the point? Can he handle the ball? Oh, he's too small to play the shooting guard. And shooting guard is another term that came along after a while. So he's a wing at 6'5", got the wingspan of almost 7 feet that they like, and apparently a pretty good defender, and averaged 18 points a game and shot 42% during his senior year. Second team all ACC, which you take that with a grain of salt because it ain't your father's ACC. It's kind of Duke and everybody else. And Duke had all 5 starters taken in the draft. That's happened a couple of other times. And, again, I would take that with a grain of salt because when you think of the last undefeated team, if you're old enough to remember that was Indiana, 1976. It was 4 seniors and a junior. And if that was today, they wouldn't have stayed around that long. And if the junior was coming off a national championship, he'd certainly come out for the NBA draft. But Kent Benson stayed another year. And Kent Benson in 1977 was the number one pick. By the way, the last, if you haven't heard this a million times, the last white American-born player to be taken number one. 48 years later, Cooper Flagg goes number 1. So all 5 starters went, but again, there was a period of time where if you had 5 starters, let's say 2 juniors and 3 seniors, the 3 seniors would go and the 2 juniors would stay, and they might be taken the next year when their eligibility was up. But last team to do that was 2012 Kentucky. That's when John Calipari was running them in and out, a lot of one and done, so that made a lot of sense. And then before that, 2006 UConn, their players were selected. Also, the draft going to 2 rounds. There was a time, I think it was 10 rounds of the draft, and almost nobody made it after like the 4th round. But I guess the honor of being drafted was a pretty cool thing. So that's that. Also, Duke a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, had all 5 players drafted, but I wasn't a consistent starting 5. Jeremy Roach came back and played 3 more years for them. All right, let's get to the stadium thing and where this stands now. I think there's a lot of nervousness, a lot of negotiating through the media that's going on. That Mayor Bowser is saying that the owners are livid, blindsided, blah 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 blah. What you got now, I think, is a lot of politicking going on by the city council members. Phil Mendelson, the city council chairman, early on expressed opposition to this, and a lot of people thought, oh boy, the city council chairman doesn't want this. He said in what he introduced the other day, which is going to be a hearing taking place July 29th and 30th, where citizens can voice their opposition, voice their concerns, and so forth. He said no one should infer from the introduction of this bill that funding in the mayor's proposed budget for the Washington Commanders football team is in, quote, jeopardy. Mendelson wrote in a statement accompanying the bill, noting that the capital funds for the stadium remain in the budget and are expected to be approved in July. So it's going to be a delay of about a month, and the Commanders are right to put pressure on the city council. This is how deals get done. But there was a breakdown today in the Post, and there's really only one city council member who's a flat no. There are 4 yeses, and there's 3 undecided, including Mendelson, and 4 no unless we get this. And it's going to take 7 votes to get it through. So you got the 4. You got to come up with 3 between the 3 undecided and the 4 who want something else involved in this. Now, Brianne Nadeau is from Ward 1, and her position is if we don't spend any local dollars, I would consider it. I'm not sure we need to vote on it. The leverage that the Commanders have in this allows them to get some city funding on this. There is some leverage, but the reality is they're going to make a hell of a lot of money on this. They're getting land control around the stadium where they can build. They can build commercial buildings and reap the revenue from that. The city should also do well for this. Nats Park got a lot of opposition. If you remember 20 years ago, Linda Kropp on the city council leading the opposition, and it looked like she was going to kill the thing, but she didn't do it. And all the fears that they had about not being able to recoup the money, which was, and you think of it now, and millions versus billions, a quaint $600 million for the whole Megillah and all to be paid by the city. They got that back. There was a 20-year plan to get that back in tax revenue. And even with the recession and even with the lack of progress of hotels and restaurants and other commerce around Nats Park, they still got it back in 6 years. They were projecting 20. They got it back in 6. So, likely in 10, 15 years, we'll look back on the fighting over what will amount to about $200-300 million. I mean, really, that's what we're talking about here. It's the city kicking in $1.1 billion. I know there's some concerns being voiced about the interest on the bonds to pay it off. Okay, that factors in too, but millions turn into billions pretty quickly. And that was one of the things that Joe Theismann discussed with Mike Vaccaro, who does a podcast. And they talked about this yesterday about the building of RFK. You'll hear Theismann make a couple of mistakes here, which I'm going to correct. But this is Joey T doing what he does best, selling sunshine and selling the idea of the stadium being built on the RFK site.
When I played in Washington, we went to RFK Stadium. We'd drive down to GW Parkway, go there. I only saw the stadium in a parking lot. I didn't realize there was how much land around it. With the things they want to do, the developments that they're talking about, I think it's exciting. 2 years ago, we did a thing. Peyton Manning was there with his Peyton Place. Yeah. And there was Mark Mosley, Darryl Green, Larry Brown, Jeff Passan, myself. We all walked around RFK as they began to start to tear it down. For me, it's it's bittersweet memories. It was where my leg got broken, but it was also where we enjoyed such tremendous success. And people have asked me an awful lot about what my favorite game is in football, and I think they expect me to say the Super Bowl, and certainly it was. But the NFC Championship game against the Cowboys at RFK Stadium, our fans, our stadium, our arch rival, chance to go to the Super Bowl, all those things were in play. And we managed to win. And at the end of the game, I'm getting goosebumps telling this story right now. At the end of the game, I'm standing on the sidelines, and they brought in these like 3 tiers of aluminum seats, and people are pounding their feet, and the ground beneath my feet is actually shaking. And it's surreal when I think about that particular moment, standing there and feeling the vibrations and the energy and the enthusiasm. And, with the success that the team had last year and, the new stadium, probably going to take 3-4 years to build. So, they're looking at we're 25, maybe 28 if they get it right at that time. So, but it's great to go back to the location. I think there are a lot of people who wanted the name to stay the same. They want a lot of things to be the same. This is a chance to sort of get some of it back a little bit in the location that they drove to the stadium to. They parked in the certain spots. So it's a chance for them to feel it again.
Yeah, I think $2.7 billion stadium, $1 billion, the development around there as well. As you said, a lot of land around there. I'm sure they'll bring things back. Yeah, that's chump change these days.
Okay, I got a question for you, Mike. Okay, here, help me understand this. When did we start talking in billions? I mean, it was like when you were a young guy growing up, oh God, I love to be a millionaire. Oh gosh, a millionaire, that's unbelievable. Now it's like, okay, you're a millionaire. So, and now they're into the billions, and we see a number of them around. I can tell you that.
It's Joe Theismann on a podcast with Mike Vaccaro. A couple things. Number one, Joe, you need to follow the news a little bit here. If this gets approved, and it gets approved in the next couple of months by the city council, it's 2030. It's not 2028, as you're speculating there, and that's all part of the picture here. They're saying even if this is delayed a couple of months, vote by the city council, that could screw things up for the Commanders in some ways, including getting the 2031 Women's World Cup in that stadium, making a bid for the Super Bowl. A lot of things that go into. So that's another thing. And yes, the stands were shaking at RFK Stadium when they played the Cowboys in the NFC Championship game in 1983. Those were temporary stands. He said they brought in 3 tiers of aluminum seats. Those seats went back to, I believe, Vince Lombardi when he came in 1969, and they expanded the seating for the stadium for football from 50,000 to 55,000 with 5,000 temporary seats that would come out for baseball. Now, they only came out for a couple of years because the Senators left town in 1971 after the 71 season. So by the time you got to 83, those temporary seats were still sitting there, and they couldn't take them out because they had rusted onto the moorings to keep them in place. But yes, those temporary seats had been there, and I've told this story before, but they used to have bat day. Believe it or not, you'd go to the stadium, they'd give the kid a full-size bat. Nobody would hand out a weapon like that today, but you got a full-size bat. We sat, my dad and I, we sat in those temporary stands where everybody banged those bats for 9 innings. And my father said, we're never going to bat day again. And we didn't. But the temporary seats were the ones that shook. And everybody who talks about the romantic notion of the entire stadium shaking, it was that section of temporary seats. That's what they were. And they didn't bring them in just for the NFC Championship game. So a couple of small corrections there. But what you get from Theismann when he talks about it is the great romanticism of that place. So whenever you get this pushback from the city council, you got to remember that the constituents want this to happen. That people, yeah, sure, you want the city council members looking out for your tax dollars. Absolutely. But when all is said and done, this would be great for the city. The NFL wants it in a big way. That's why Roger Goodell showed up at the news conference to announce all of this. You now have good, strong ownership with a background in making deals of this size. So, it's a time for Spielkes right now, for sure, on both sides. But reality is, I think by the time we get to the end of the summer, there's going to be a stadium deal in place, and it's not going to totally screw things up. But, deadlines spur action, and both sides, Mayor Bowser and the Commanders versus the city council, both sides are talking about urgency, with the city council saying, ho, 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 before we jump into this, let's make sure we get this right. We only get really one bite of the apple to make sure we got the proper deal. But I think you can look at what happened with Nats Park. And by the way, one of the things that they're fighting over, and city council members are pushing for this, they want the Commanders to pay rent. And they point to the Nats are paying something like $6 million a year for rental at Nats Park. Well, that was built by the city. The city paid to build that. It was a hell of a lot less money than a stadium for football is going to cost now, 20 years later. But that's a city-owned property. The Nationals are a tenant. This will be much more complicated than that, though the Commanders will be a tenant in a stadium on city property. They will have built the building. They kind of own the house. So I think you have to take that into account. But, maybe they'll come up with some kind of a compromise. I believe that the way it's structured now, the Commanders only have to pay $1 a year in rent. Coming up, more of the Glue Guys podcast. Been really enjoying these. This is Alex Smith and a couple of others who do this. And it is I think really insightful. When they talk to various people. They talk to Seth Wickersham, who's got this new book out about quarterbacks, and we'll play some of the highlights of that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
About 3 or 4 weeks ago, Seth Wickersham got his time in the sun when kind of advances from his book came out. It's called American Kings, and it's about quarterbacks all the way from high school through the pros. And he had done some reporting for the book about Caleb Williams and his dad, about how they almost shook up the draft. Like they had all kinds of different plans, including Caleb playing in the UFL for a year and then becoming a free agent. But when push came to shove, Caleb said, no, it's okay. I'm going to play for the Bears. That would have been quite a thing if that would have happened. We heard rumblings of that, but this was confirmed in the book. So that got a lot of run. But there's a lot more to it. And he was a guest the other day on the Glue Guys podcast, which I really enjoy. I think these guys do a great job. It's Alex Smith, who finished his football career here, of course, and Shane Battier, the former Duke star, who had like a 12 or 13-year career in the NBA, won a couple of championships with the Miami Heat. And they do a really good job of, not more than taking you behind the scenes, kind of giving you the mental aspect of that level of sports, which I find to be very interesting. And so this was Wickersham explaining, and this is true with, I think, a lot of people who either talk about sports or write about sports. We're all failed athletes. Some get to a higher level. That Rick Tellender wrote for many years for Sports Illustrated. I don't know whether he's still writing or not, but Rick Tellender was an all Big Ten safety. at Northwestern. He reached a high level. There have been a few guys who've made it to the NFL, NBA who write, but Seth Wickersham is like a lot of us who had a career that didn't really even get off the ground in high school. And that, he says, was the motivation for writing this book about quarterbacks.
It comes from like having failed. And, you know, I made quarterback my identity when I was, you know, in some very, and that's one of the interesting things about, I think, quarterback is that, like, you know, you don't play it, you are one. And you wear all these different, and when you do that, you're wearing all these different hats. You know, you sign up to do all these things that really no other job in sports, certainly American sports, has to do. And, you know, my early years in high school, I was, you know, determined to be a quarterback. I started on JV. I had some good games. I had some bad games, but I was just like, you know, I was obsessed. And when I first got reps on varsity, you know, it was like something broke down. And, you know, Peyton Manning and I talked about it a little bit. He talked about when he was a rookie in the NFL, he thought defenses were so much faster than in college. And so what he did was he played faster. And what he later realized you need to do is kind of respect their speed, but let them play, you know, at their speed, and you do your things at your speed. And in my own little way in Anchorage, Alaska, you know, like some wiring broke down in that moment where, you know, things I had committed to muscle memory all of a sudden weren't working. And so I think that, like, you know, I got into this professionally. You know, I was hired at ESPN Magazine when I graduated from college. Obviously, I spent some time with you, you know, back during one of the hardest years of your life. And I've just always been fascinated with, you know, what it means to do this job at every level, from high school to college to rookie, NFL. And then, you know, what's it like to be a legend in retirement? I think that, like, a lot of the things and the traits and the ways you have to hardwire yourself to survive, you know, this winnowing from 16,000 starting quarterbacks in high school to 32 in the NFL to, you know, 12 good ones to 4 great ones at any time. You know, I think that a lot of that is kind of fundamentally at odds with, you know, being content away from the game. And so those are the questions that I was trying to pursue.
Or just being normal, Seth. You can say it. You know, Alex can. You can't rip on his brothers. Just that's, you know, you're just not normal when you're fighting those odds. So was this book therapeutic for you, or was it a reckoning for you?
Well, it was interesting because, like, when I played quarterback, you know, I had some good games, and I had this one chance, you know, to lead a game-winning drive. And, like, all quarterbacks love doing that because, in a weird way, I mean, Alex can speak to it, but it's like you feel liberated. Like you're kind of not, you know, doing what the coaches tell you to do, and the ball is kind of in your hands. And we moved to midfield, and I moved left, and I dropped back. I started going left, and I had one receiver there, and he was pretty well covered. And my coach even came to the sideline, and he was, like, waving at me to throw him the ball out of bounds. And you know, a pass that needed to be low and outside was high and inside, and it was intercepted. And, you know, I was just distraught. And you know, you become a quarterback in some ways because you want to stand out. And in that moment, I just wanted to blend in and disappear. And, I remember my center was next to me, and he put his hand on my helmet, you know, when I had my head down. And I met up with him later in the book. You know, we just met up for random drinks one night as I was doing the book. And, like, you know, I've been to, like, countless Springsteen concerts, and I understand the irony, but I had to go there and, like, go to the glory days and say, like, you know, out of nowhere, I was like, why do you think I didn't make it? You know, and his answer was really, his answer allowed, you know, I mean, his answer, what he said allowed me to kind of forgive that 16-year-old boy who, you know, I couldn't forgive.
What did he say? Or should we, because I haven't gotten to that part in the book yet.
They couldn't block for you, right?
Yeah, they couldn't block. Yeah, that's what he said. And, you know, whether that was true or not, it meant so much because it was like I had just, you know, as you guys know, it's like you beat yourself up quite a bit because, you know, even though you can intellectually understand that this is a team game and that there are other factors at play, you're constantly wondering what you could have done differently.
I think about that. Seth Wickersham is probably about 40. So this is well over 20 years ago. And it was a high school football game, but he still lives with it. And that's what sports mean to us. I mean, even if, you're like me, like sorted out at the age of 8. You're not going anywhere in sports. If you could play at the high school level, that's going to be the top for you. And here's a guy who was probably in that spot. Maybe he was thinking about college football, but all these years later, it's still eating him up. That with a chance to lead a game-winning drive, he threw an interception. And I guess in some ways, you never get over your athletic failures wherever they happen to be, whether it's even going back to Little League or you make it all the way to the pros. They just kind of live with you. This is the Tom Brady part, and I think it illustrates what made Tom Brady as great as he was, that he never lost that edge. And here's Wickersham with Alex Smith on just what Brady did and to what lengths he went to be the great quarterback that he was.
Tom Brady's last year in New England, the man has won, 5 or 6 Super Bowls at this point, maybe the greatest player of all time, that in the very front of his playbook, he has written himself in all caps these self affirmations, they're like, you are the man, you were built for this, right? Like you love the big moments, right? Like he's written a series of these things that he reads to himself every day. He's fucking Tom Brady, right? And this is still his tools to counteract all this shit that we still deal with.
The vulnerability and the doubt. And I remember I was once in Brady's, and that was before his last Super Bowl in New England. So he had already won 5. That was the night before he wrote that in his playbook. And, I once was with Brady and I said, do you ever feel doubt? And he goes, no. And I knew that he wasn't telling the truth. And yet, one of the things I write about in the book is how quarterbacks, especially in the NFL, you have to get yourself to a place by game time where doubt cannot creep in. And you've been really upfront with the vulnerability of that. And Steve Young has too.
Yeah.
And then you have people like Elway, who were terrified when he goes to Granada Hills High School and they think he's the next Joe Namath. And he's like, how am I going to do this? And I thought that doubt and how people deal with it, whether they, go to social media now, whether they take it to, a higher power, whether they drink, whether they womanize, however, what all these mechanisms that people have to create to survive in this fragile ecosystem. Andrew Luck once told me that he once saw that Peyton Manning had an entire ecosystem of helpers. He had assistants, he had a chef, he had all these people. And Andrew, of course, didn't even have a smartphone for most of his career. I mean, as his notoriety increased, he shrunk his world. And he was like, is that what I need to be great? There is no roadmap. And it's one of the things that, especially when I talked to you for the book, and, we had spent that time about 15 years ago when you were in that complete mind of your shoulder injury, where, it's like, where are the adults to help you through that? And that's one of the things that you and I talked about. And, you had that later in your career with Andy Reid, where you had an adult who he had been through this. And, very few quarterbacks, I think, have that, especially come into the league with the team they're drafted by, have that person who can kind of help lead block for them, for lack of a better phrase.
I spent a lot of years doing radio with John Riggins, and he was a running back, not a quarterback, obviously, but Hall of Fame running back. And he ran with a style where it looked like he was going for the goal line and nobody was going to stop him. He was big and fast. He had everything that you want in a running back. And I asked him what drove him. And sometimes you assume that a player of that level says, I got to be the best. I'm driven to be the best player in the league. No, it was more fear of failure. And I bet you there are a lot of top athletes who are driven by that they don't want to fail. And that's what is the biggest motivator for them. And I think even that's the case with Tom Brady. Even with what he said to Seth Wickersham, that it's so much of a fear that you're not going to be able to perform that it keeps you sharp. I think there's a lot to that. Here's another part about John Elway. And I think this addresses why great athletes rarely become great coaches, because they don't have an understanding, really, of the average athlete, and there is no place in their life for empathy.
The capacity for empathy with them is very underdeveloped. Let's just put it that way. You know, you have this moment where John Elway's son is playing quarterback, an Elway in Denver playing quarterback wearing number 7, and Elway was the offensive coordinator for his son, and his son is a good player, good enough to play at Arizona State, but he was like just feeling so much pressure. And Elway, of all people, Elway was the first number 1 quarterback, you know, top best player in the nation as a high school quarterback, number 1 pick in the draft, first ballot Hall of Famer. He was the first one to do that. And you would think, of all people, he would know something about like the pressure of living up to expectations. And he told me, he's like, I didn't care. Like, he just, you know, my answer to him was just go compete. And, you know, when I talk about that type of mentality that helps you make it through this really tough environment, you know, in again, the winnowing that I come back to, this filtering, you know, how compatible is that with life, you know, outside of playing, you know, professional sports? Look at Tom Brady. I mean, he had the greatest runway, you know, to retirement that any quarterback could ever ask for. I mean, he had a long career. He ended on his terms. He won everything you could possibly win. He had gigs lined up, you know, as he was getting ready to exit years beforehand, so that he knew that, you know, when he walked away, he would be walking into, you know, all of these different things. And even he says, you know, that it was like, you know, being, you know, in a dryer where you're just bouncing around everywhere. And I think that it's hard because, like Sean Payton told me, he's like, you know, when you have a quarterback, everyone on the team is getting on the airplane, and everyone except the quarterback goes right. The quarterbacks go left. And then, you know, the rest of your life, you're the one going right.
Well, I think that's also like inherent in the position. By the way, I think of the mystery of the quarterback, like, you know, especially on a football team, everything else, right? Like, there's 5 linemen, and oftentimes a bunch of them are kind of interchangeable. There's like 3 or 4 receivers, right? And they all are out there, and multiple running backs and multiple tight ends, and they sub in and out of the game. And same thing on defense, right? Like, the guys take breaks, and no one plays every snap. There's one position that plays every snap in football, right? And they're like, there is no, you're the starting quarterback, or you, like you said, you're the backup, right? Like, it just is, it's so different. And I think that adds to this in the football setting, right? Like, because every other position group is kind of a unit, and they do things together and work together. And I've been in a lot of QB rooms where I've talked about these guys, like, the experience is so different, because I've been in some that, man, it's sharp elbows and cutthroat, and you can't trust the guy next to you because he's not rooting for you at all, right? And by nature of, because there can only be one, right? Like, there's only one guy, which is weird, and I don't know why that ever developed like that. You know, that it is the only position where you can't sub in and out, and you know.
Except if you're coached by Steve Spurrier, and he did that all the time, but he was not really an NFL coach. The point he makes there about the quarterback room, which is what they call it now, and what a great situation they had here with Marcus Mariota and Jaden Daniels. And the evidence of it being absolutely real last year was that Mariota came back. He came back here. He lives in Vegas, and maybe even had a chance to sign with the Raiders and be at home. But that is obviously a very good situation, which you don't always have. And 2 examples that I can give you here goes way back. But when Joe Theismann came to the Redskins, he'd played in Canada for 3 years, and he came here in 1974, and there was a strike. And it was only involving the veteran players because they were members of the union. And even though Theismann had a contract with the Redskins, he was a rookie and technically was not a part of the union. He hadn't made the team yet. And so with Sonny Jurgensen and Billy Kilmer out, Theismann played in an exhibition game with a bunch of guys who came off the street and things like that, and played pretty well. And then he was talking to the reporters after the game, and he said, yeah, you know, I'm gonna keep those 2 old men on the bench. And so Kilmer told me this story. He said he called Sonny and said, "Did you read this story in the Post? What Theismann said?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Well," he said, "we're going to make a deal here." He said, "It doesn't matter which one of us plays as long as he doesn't." So there was that. And then when Jim Hart played here his last year in the league, this is 1984, he'd been the starting quarterback for the St. Louis Cardinals for maybe 15 years. And they drafted Neil Lomax. And without a salary cap in those days, it was possible to keep around a veteran quarterback who had been playing all these years and start a rookie. And so I asked Hart, did you mentor Neil Lomax when he was with the Cardinals? And he said, no, he didn't want it. He didn't want me to help him with that. So there's that, and what you heard Alex Smith say, and Smith, started his career in the last 20 years, started into his career. He says that's real, that there are guys who are in the quarterback room who want you to fail so they can play. The window is small. You don't get to play pro football that long, and if you don't get an opportunity to start, sometimes it never happens for you. And not that you hope that the other guy gets hurt, but you're not interested in him succeeding. It's not all kumbaya. It's not all Marcus Mariota saying to Jaden Daniels, hey, do what you do best and go out and win this game, champ. That's fairy tale stuff for a lot of teams. It was real here, but I think that's a window of exactly how that works. Last part is about Arch Manning. And I wondered about this, and I don't know whether this is exactly the case, but Arch Manning, who grew up in New Orleans, his dad went to Ole Miss, was a legend there. And his uncle went to Ole Miss, was a legend there, and then Peyton Manning, he goes to another SEC school, Tennessee. So what was he doing? Although Texas is in the SEC now, but why did he wind up in Austin? This is Seth Wickersham explaining that on the Glue Guys podcast.
I do try to tell the story of the Mannings through Arch, and how crazy his recruitment got, and they wanted it to be a 1970s recruitment where, they wanted the high school coach to be the one running point, not even the parents. And there was a moment where Arch was entering ninth grade where they played a spring game at Isidore Newman in New Orleans. And they were, around the red zone, and Arch is in the shotgun, and he has a slant called on the right side, and he notices that the corner's in press coverage. And so he tugs on his face mask, and he changes the route to a go. And of course, that's the echoes of Peyton's, impact on the NFL. And, there's just so much going on in that one moment. Throws a fade for a touchdown pass, and Cooper was in the stands, and, he was like, oh my God, it's on. Like, his life changed right then because, if you're Arch Manning, how do you play quarterback, even if people intellectually understand that, being great in college and being the first pick in the NFL draft and being great in the NFL is almost impossible odds. It's kind of expected. Let's be honest. It's so messed up, but that's kind of true. And, one of the reasons why he picked Texas to go to college is because, Austin is a huge town, and he could have a semblance of being able to disappear there. Whereas if he, had gone to Ole Miss, he would have had that chance.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, that he could sort of disappear at Texas. And his dad has said, Cooper has said, pick a school where if football doesn't work out for you, you're still going to be happy. Now, with what Wickersham said there about being part of the Manning dynasty, that going on to be a quarterback in the NFL and a great quarterback in the NFL is expected. And when you look at the odds of the 16,000 kids who are playing high school quarterback and how many of them even get a sniff of the NFL, much less college, I mean, that's pretty remarkable pressure. So now it makes a lot of sense that you would go to a place like Austin. And look, that's a great college town. I've been there many times, and it's a beautiful campus. The state capitol is there, and football matters, but this may have been a perfect situation for him where he got to, get his feet wet for a couple of years. We'll see what happens this year. There's still enormous pressure facing him. He's the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman Trophy, and he started 2 college games. So that's kind of the nature of being a Manning. Coming up in the next hour, we'll talk about baseball some. Jeff Passan was on PTI yesterday discussing a variety of topics. And speaking of music, Dusty Baker did something with F.P. Santangelo, which is really funny, Santangelo now, I guess, doing broadcasting for the Giants. They talked about music, and Dusty was the coolest manager there ever was. And when it comes to music, he knows his stuff. We'll get to that more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. So there's been a lot of yak about NFL players participating in the Olympics in 2028. We have flag football. And while some may be enthusiastic about it, there's some questions that are being brought up about it. We'll get to that later this hour. Dusty Baker, the coolest manager the Nationals ever had, and maybe the coolest manager in the history of baseball, talks music coming up. We'll get to that. So other notes from baseball as well. And believe it or not, we will get you very hungry for lunch before 11 o'clock in the morning. I can promise you that as we head into the weekend and headed to some vacation for me. I'm going to be off next week and headed to Seattle to hang out with my son. And speaking of food, probably eat some really good food there. But that should be fun. Looking forward to that. So we're at the point now where baseball's going to have to carry us, at least until we get to training camp for the NFL. And in terms of sports watching, there's the WNBA, which has picked up some interest for sure. But it's pretty much baseball. And there was a period of time where everybody used to clear out for baseball. Yeah, it's amazing that the NBA Finals would wrap up in mid-April because, hey, baseball, we can't be competing with baseball. Well, now the NBA Finals wrap up in late June, and baseball be damned. And baseball starts earlier, and the other sports go later. And what used to be big highlight of summer, the All-Star Game, it's kind of a blip now. And that's really the only All-Star Game that means anything. They've done away with the Pro Bowl, as they should have. And basketball's teetering. They're going to try U.S. versus international players this year. That's the last hope for that. Baseball is going to be it. And Jeff Passan covers baseball. He does it very well for ESPN. He was on PTI yesterday, and they got to a variety of topics, including the team that has spent the most money, Juan Soto, with the $750 million contract, it's luxury tax and everything else. So what? Passan with his look at the Mets and other topics in sports. Mets first.
I want to be bullish on the Mets because I saw the way that they played over the first, 65 or so games of the season. They were really good. They pitched at the top of their lineup, even when Juan Soto wasn't hitting. Francisco Lindor was, Pete Alonso was, Brandon Nimmo was, Jeff McNeil was. So there's talent there, but the way that they've looked over the last week and a half has been very problematic. And I think it shows that before the July 31st trade deadline, David Stearns, their president of baseball operations, has a lot of work to do. Now, they're missing Kodai Senga. He has a sub-1.5 ERA this year. So when he comes back, it's going to be a little bit better. They just got Frankie Montas back, looked really good in his first outing. So I think some of this is getting healthy, but let's look at what Soto has done, particularly in June. This is the Juan Soto, guys, who signed for $765 million. His OPS is up almost at 900 at this point, and all of those frustrations of the first 6-7 weeks of the season seem to have melted away, and he's finally getting comfortable and being the guy that the Mets thought that they were bringing in, and the one who I still think is going to lead them to a postseason spot. The Braves, on the other hand, they look better, and Acuña's looked like one of the best players on earth. I mean, when he is healthy, he's up there with Ohtani, he's up there with Judge. He is awesome, but Chris Sale being out with broken ribs, not great, and there's just not a whole lot of pitching depth with the Braves right now. And on top of that, they got to claw their way back from that deficit that they had at the beginning of the season when they lost 7 straight games. That sort of thing looms large in a playoff scope that is as tight as the National League is right now.
Well, yeah, part of that tightness is in the Central, where the Cubs are still leading the Brewers and Cardinals. And I want to ask you about Kyle Tucker. Jeff, he's played really, really well, but as you know, of course, he will be a free agent if the Cubs don't get him off the market. What do you think is likely to happen with Tucker as well as he's been playing? You think the Cubs sign him, trade him, or just let him walk, which is what I fear?
Well, I can tell you one thing, Mike. They are not going to trade him because this is a first-place team right now, a team that has not just playoff aspirations, but believes it can be a World Series contender. And that is specifically because of who Kyle Tucker is. He does so many of the things that, me personally, baseball fan, absolutely loves. Beyond playing defense and running the bases, 19 stolen bases already. He's a guy who's near the 300 batting average, 400 on base, 500 slug. That is rarefied territory. More than that, though, he walks more than he strikes out. And for a guy who is a power hitter like that, for him to take those quality at-bats, I've talked with people in the Cubs organization and on the team, and they say that Kyle Tucker sets a specific type of standard for the at-bat that a Chicago Cub should take. And so then it goes back to Tom Ricketts. Is he willing to put money down on the table? Because it's going to cost a lot. Kyle Tucker has played himself well into the $400 million plus range. And at 29 years old, he is going to be far and away the most exciting free agent this offseason and the one that all the big market teams are going to want to bring in. So Ricketts is going to have to step up, put his money where his mouth is, and do what he hasn't done yet as owner of the Cubs.
Yeah, as we are well aware, who are Cub fans for life, Tucker and Alex Bregman leave Houston, Jeff. And yeah, Houston rolls right along, got the 5+ game lead in first place in their division. How do the Astros keep doing this?
Because they're inevitable, Mike. Every single year, it seems like the Astros just keep bringing players in, developing players, making good deals. Jeremy Pena has taken a leap forward this year. Isaac Paredes at third base absolutely loves Dyken Park, but it gets down to their starting pitching. Hunter Brown has emerged as a Cy Young candidate. Framber Valdez is his steady self. And when you have Josh Hader and Brian Abreu at the back end of that bullpen, it's a tough road to hoe for any team trying to beat the Astros.
We will get you out of here on this. It's about a story that you wrote, and the piece dropped today. It's about rookie on the A's, Jacob Wilson, who has hit nearly .350 this season. He included one unusual theory. He talked to you about it for his early success. Share it with us, please.
Jacob Wilson believes that he is as good of a baseball player as he is because he plays Fortnite. Now, if this sounds a little bit weird, I thought so as well at the beginning, but his argument here is that when you are playing Fortnite, it is a game with fast decision-making, and it teaches you that in the moment you have to see what's right in front of you and react instantaneously. And what does that sound like? Sounds a lot like trying to hit a baseball. And look, Jacob Wilson has plenty of other things going for him. His father was Jack Wilson, longtime big league shortstop. So he's got the genetics. He works hard, but he's not giving up video games. In fact, he's playing them so he can become a better baseball player, guys.
Jeff, if
the generation gap,
being an ace at Fortnite makes you a great baseball player, my son should be really damn amazed if one correlates to the other.
Yeah, just amazing.
I'll tell you something about Fortnite. My son, used to live in New York, and he used to go out and shoot baskets. So he was at the park one day, and a kid came up but didn't have a basketball, asked if he could shoot with him, and he tossed him a ball. The kid barely got it up to the basket. And he said to my son, he said, "Oh, I've been playing too much Fortnite." Yeah. I mean, maybe it helps you if you're a Major League Baseball player. But when you're a kid, you shouldn't be playing Fortnite all day. You should be out running around. Make sure you have enough strength to get the ball up to the basket. One other thing, baseball field related, I'll get to the Dusty Baker stuff here in a minute. Clayton Kershaw yesterday pitched against the Colorado Rockies. He struck out 5 in 6 innings. That raises his career strikeout total to 2,997. So he's 3 short of 3,000. He's been pitching for 18 years. And this just highlights how amazing Nolan Ryan was, because 18 years for Kershaw. Now, he's been hurt a lot. That means something. And nowadays, they don't let you pitch 9 innings anymore. But the strikeout is no big deal in baseball. used to be that you'd look at the strikeout totals. Oh, that guy strikes out too much. No, not anymore. It's swing for the fences and strikeouts. So what? So you'd think that, maybe over 18 years he would have had more than 2,997. But it just shows you how little these guys pitch now, because Nolan Ryan, he did pitch 24 years, I'll give you that, but Nolan Ryan finished his career with 5,714. That's nearly 6,000 strikeouts. So essentially, you look at Verlander's career with just short of 3,000 strikeouts, and to go past Ryan, he'd have to do that again. He'd have to have like a 36-year career and not age. Just remarkable how many strikeouts he had. And Randy Johnson, he didn't quite get to 5,000, but this is impressive too. He's got 4,875, and Roger Clemens, steroids or not, 4,672. I thought Walter Johnson would have had more than that. Walter Johnson pitched for 22, 23 years, and if the game went 13 innings, he pitched 13 innings. Nobody took pitch counts into account in those days. He finished with 3,500, but Ryan's 5,714. That's going to stand forever, because nobody's going to pitch long enough to do it. And if they pitch 20 years, as Verlander may, that you won't have enough innings to ring those up, even though players are striking out more than they used to. Interesting. Okay, Dusty Baker doing a podcast with F.P. Santangelo. Whatever became of F.P. Santangelo? Well, he's back in San Francisco doing work for the Giants. Dusty Baker, of course, should have been renewed, was not renewed. Davey Martinez won the World Series 2 years later, but Dusty went on and finally got his World Series championship with the Houston Astros, and he will be in the Hall of Fame. He's 75 years old now, and in addition to being an outstanding manager and an outstanding player with several teams, including the Braves and the Dodgers, he's a music aficionado. And as he talked about with FP on the podcast, music is a big part of his life.
I graduated from high school, 67. That summer, my mom gave me and my buddy 2 tickets to the Monterey Jazz Festival. That's why I saw Hendrix. But I also saw T-Bone Walker. I also saw, I think Jefferson Airplane was there. Then at Santa Clara, I was supposed to go there and play basketball. Well, I think I saw Jefferson Airplane and Stan Getz together. I mean, imagine Ike and Tina Turner at Winterland and the Spirit open, before them. I was just thinking the other day, and then we'd go always to Freeborn Hall in Davis. That was happening at the time, and I think I saw one of Bob Marley's last concerts. And to me, a musician express himself like we can't as athletes. I can hit a ball as hard as I can, but they don't know me unless they see me do an interview or something, and they still may not know me. But your music sort of transcends how you are. It's hard to hide behind not the feeling that you have in music. And I've told players, I said, sometimes you got to look ugly while you play, because you see singers, they don't care how they look. It just you got beautiful music coming out. And I was fortunate enough when I played with the Braves, like Al Green and Isaac Hayes and the Temptations and David Ruffin and Rufus Thomas. I mean, you name them. That was a totally different scene at that time. While I was in the South, and I came back, and so, like a lot of my music came from Orlando, and when I was on the Braves, and he used to take me with me. He was like my uncle, my cool uncle that you could tell anything to. Like Hank was like my dad. Your dad, you can tell most things, but your dad, you can tell me anything. I don't think so. But your uncle, you can tell everything. And Orlando, he said, hey man, like I was into psychedelics and the rock and all. I was into R&B too and blues because of my dad. But the San Francisco scene, man, was like Santana. We see Santana like every week, and I love Santana. And then we see Tower Power. It's like, oh yeah, they're an opening band over here and there. But Orlando, he told me, he said, hey man, you got to get mellow. I said, what you mean, man? He says, because I used to go out with him. He says, do it like I do. And he would cross his legs, I cross my legs, trying to be cool like him. And so, I swear. And so he's like, hey, you got to dig You know Stanley Turrentine? I said, no. You know Thelonious Monk, who my dad loved? And Miles, he loved Miles, but he loved like Celia Cruz, Chucho Valdez, whom I met through, Orlando, Tito Puente. All these dudes were like, Orlando knew him, and man, he could play the congas and the drums, and he could dance, and, like he was like one of my heroes off the field and on the field.
What were the spots you used to go to in San Francisco to see your music?
Winterland, Fillmore, down the bay, down the peninsula. Was that Circle Star? Yeah.
Circle Star.
Yeah, and then we went down to the down there and saw. I took some of the boys down when I was a manager to see Sade. We saw Rod Stewart down at going towards San Jose. What's it? The Shoreline Amphitheater. Yeah, and then so like we were always going to go. See some music, because man, that's what you need. That's what you need for rhythm. That's what you need to hit with. That's what you need to think with. That's what you need to be mellow, because sometimes you get so uptight and you don't even know you're uptight.
I was telling JT Snow, who was working with Bryce Eldridge,
yeah,
tell him to listen to some jazz, some Motown, get some rhythm at first base.
Well, when I was a batting coach, right?
Yeah.
I used to tell everybody, hey man, pick your own music, boom, boom, right? So everybody come with their music, and I play them, and you hit with music. Because one time when I was a player on the Dodgers, Al Campanis and Tom Lasorda told me to, in Chicago, and they didn't have no lights in Chicago, and they were like, hey man, we want you to go out dancing tonight. So I thought it was a trap, because usually they're trying to keep me in the room, and they told me to go out. Like, nah, I ain't going for that. They don't go out. You don't have no rhythm. I said, well, I'm a brother. I'm born with rhythm. And they're like, no, you don't have none right now. So I went out, danced, boom, I got hot. So I took that into when I was a batting coach.
Whatever works.
Whatever works, dude. When I was a player, I was in charge of the music on the bus, in the clubhouse, or else I put myself in charge, to tell you the truth. Whatever mood I wanted to be in. I play jazz sometime, I play Snoop sometime, oh, by the way, I went to see Snoop for a second time up in Sacramento, and I took my son and everything, and it was a blast this winter.
Do you know Snoop?
Well, he knows me. He said I was his favorite player as a kid growing up when I was in
awesome.
LA. Yeah, I know Snoop.
Oh, that's cool.
I love Snoop. I'll try to get Snoop for the All-Star game, and they wouldn't let me. We couldn't pull it off when I was at the All-Star game in LA a couple years ago. But, I would play like I said, Tupac if I wanted to get, more aggressive. And I try to let the guys in the clubhouse play their own music. And then have music like you guys play Spanish music on Monday and rock and roll on Tuesday. Somebody's in charge, or somebody want country western Wednesday, and kind of let everybody get a sample of each other's music. And I did the same with food, and therefore we can, be a unit.
That sounds easy, but sometimes it's not. When I was in Oakland, we won 102 games, and we did that. We played Latin music one day, rock music the next day, rap, and everybody loved it because we loved each other.
Yeah.
We didn't care what was on.
But you got to be careful, because I've seen guys fight over the music.
Yes, dude. That's why I said it's not that easy.
Oh yeah, especially if you're kind of hogging the music, the genre. No, we just played that yesterday, man.
That's how I became friends with Barry. We were in Colorado the year I played for you in 1999, playing the Rockies, and he was in charge of the music, as you know, and we had lost like 6 in a row. I'm like, B, let me do the music today. And I'm like, he's like, no. I'm like, B, let me do the music today. We got to change it up. This ain't working, the same stuff you're playing every day. So he goes, when you win 3 MVPs, you can put it on whatever you want. And across the clubhouse, I said, I have won 3 MVPs. I was MVP of my high school team, my junior college team, and my college team. I'm changing it. And we put on AC/DC. We won that day.
Nah, really?
So, yeah, that's music and baseball go hand in hand, man.
They sure do, brother. Music, rounds me out, actually. First thing I do in the morning is I have my daily readings, and then I play whatever music that I want to feel like that day, whether it could be Tupac, or it could be Toto, it could be whoever, whatever mood that I'm in. Or this morning I played Grover Washington Jr. because I feel like being mellow. So
is there one person that stands out to you, like that's number one, that came into the clubhouse, that came into your coach's office,
yeah,
your manager's office?
Yeah,
because
Number
You
one.
were excited to meet them, but I guarantee you they were just as excited to meet you.
Yeah, and you know, Elvin Bishop is my fishing buddy. And so we go fishing a lot. But I met Elvin through John Lee Hooker.
Yes.
Yeah, and John Lee, and that was one of my dad's favorites.
He used to come in the clubhouse all the time.
Yeah, we talk. I mean, we talk music. He wanted to talk baseball. You know, I wanted to talk music. And he was telling me about his hero was T-Bone Walker. Where I was telling my hero, you know, was Tommy Davis. And so everybody passes something down, especially the musicians pass down. And that's what I like about the musicians, because they haven't tried to separate. Okay, you know how baseball is separating the old school from the new school? To me, there's only one school, the right school. And sabermetrics boys over here, old school guys over here, let's combine and get this together and come up with a better world. Because when I see, I was hanging with Buddy Guy, but then I saw Buddy Guy was singing with some youngster, or I'd see Eric Clapton playing with B.B. King, or Muddy Waters was singing with Mick Jagger. Now this is what you do, is that we combine the two generations, we come up with even better product than we had before.
That's former Nats manager Dusty Baker with former Nats analyst F.P. Santangelo. I guess they both work for the Giants. Dusty's an advisor. I'm not sure what F.P. does. I don't think he's part of the broadcast team, but maybe he is. But, you find this, that athletes look at movie and musicians as kind of people they'd like to be. The grass is greener on the other side, and Dusty has managed to straddle both worlds. Like if you're a player, who else would you want to hang out with on a day off than Dusty Baker? I mean, he knows everybody. He's got great stories about baseball and music, and he just has managed to mix the two in a way that he comes across. I don't know him at all. Tom Lavero does, and he's told me how great it is to hang out with Dusty. But yeah, that's just a great hang around guy who's not just dropping names, because he knows these people and they know him. And I think that's just so cool. He's the definition of cool. Dusty Baker, I think they should have kept him here. They should not have fired him. He did a good job getting the team to the playoffs 2 straight years. I think he was well respected, but they didn't want to pay anybody. So, good for Davey for winning a World Series. He'll always be celebrated for that. But I think it would have been really cool if Dusty would have done it. So I've been talking off the air with a couple of friends of mine about this, and this was on Awful Announcing, that we need a break from Stephen A. Smith. That's the headline. America needs a vacation from Stephen A. It's written by Matt Yoder, and he says, America desperately needs a break from the never-ending noise. It's been way too many years of one crisis after another, one more feud, one more rant, one more upheaval to our daily lives, and the stress of living under this regime has gotten to us all. While you could apply this to the man currently occupying the White House, we're talking about Stephen A. Smith. Quite frankly, America is exhausted. And what they did was they took his fame, and to his credit, he brings eyeballs to the television, which is what he is paid to do, and they decided that he was worth what he wanted. He very publicly had these negotiations, and they paid him $20 million a year over 5 years. He's got a $100 million contract. And when you pay a guy like that and he wants to work all the time, you let him work. The problem is that his style, the beat you over the head, gets to be too much. Like, we all love ketchup, or most of us do. You wouldn't make a meal of ketchup, and that's what Stephen A. is giving you. On top of that, in his new contract, he's allowed to do whatever the hell he wants, including going on all these political shows. So even if you say, okay, I've had enough sports for today, let me see what's going on CNN or MSNBC or whatever, and there's Stephen A. And he talks about running for president, the Democratic nominee. I mean, come on. It's enough already, and sometimes less is more. And Johnny Carson was the biggest star in television for years, for like over 20 years. And the bigger his star became, the less he worked. He had a deal where he worked 3 days a week, but everybody loved Johnny Carson. And when Johnny Carson decided enough is enough, he was about my age, in his mid-60s, he never did anything again. he made an appearance on the Letterman show once and didn't even say anything. Like, was started to read a list and then walked off the stage. And Stephen A. is proving that you can get too much Stephen A. As much as some may like him, as successful as he may be for the network, I just don't get what he is trying to do here, because there is that point of overexposure, which he reached his first time around. If you remember this, about 15 years ago, he had a television show. He was doing radio. Oh yeah, he's also got a radio show on Sirius XM now. He big-footed Michelle Beadle out the door there. It reached the point of oversaturation with ESPN, and they said enough is enough. And he went to Fox Radio for a while, then made his way back and had that show with Skip Bayless, the shouting show, and was back in a big way. But, ESPN, maybe a year from now, is going to regret this deal. They're going to say, too much, enough. I know you want to work, but it reaches a point where it's the same act and it's over and over and over again. And you just, as he said, he needs a break. Maybe he's going to take the rest of the summer off now that the NBA is out. But, his football knowledge is very limited, so it's all sizzle, very little steak. I don't know. I mean, I one thing I do admire about him, though, and you won't get this from guys like Colin Cowherd. When he's wrong, he'll tell you. I admire that about Stephen A. That if he does, if he is wrong about something, if he has a take which doesn't work out the way he expects it to, he will own up to it. I'll give him that. But yeah, it does reach a point of overexposure. But anyway, that's a wrap for me for this week and for next week as well. I want to thank Will Thompson from the Celebrity Deli, not just for coming on today, but for delivering delicious food here to the station every week. Thanks to Isaac Harris. Thanks to all of you who listen. Bram is coming up next, and I will see you back here a week from Monday at 9 a.m.